Thank you folks for clicking on the video. If you'd like to be informed when new videos go live, please hit that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that bell notification icon. Please feel free to like, comment, and share the video with family and friends, as it really does help the channel grow in the current YouTube algorithm structure. Hello everyone! Before we start with our official review of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook, just a quick heads up, if you follow the link in the description / the pinned comment below, there's a link to a currently ongoing Humble Bundle where you can pick up the Core Rulebook, the Bestiary, and the Beginner's Box for $5, or you can get all of this plus the Abomination Vaults and a ton of additional RPG content in a $25 bundle. Doing so is a great entry point into the Pathfinder 2nd Edition alternative to Dungeons & Dragons, and it also helps support the channel if you use that link in the comments below. And now, for the review! Hello everybody and welcome back to Swamp Dog Games. Today we'll be doing a review of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook. A little bit of history about Pathfinder and its relationship to Dungeons & Dragons, since Pathfinder is seeing a second resurgence with RPG players because of the current ongoing OGL fiasco from Wizards of the Coast. Ironically, that's how Pathfinder got its start to begin with. So if you go way back into the history of the internet and the world in general, Wizards had created the very successful 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons / 3.5. It was, for its time, essentially the epitome of the development history of Dungeons & Dragons. It was wildly loved by all those who enjoyed playing it. However, Wizards decided that despite how popular that system was, they wanted to go into kind of a different direction. So they came out with Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. In my opinion, 4th edition D&D stripped away a lot of the RPG mechanics of 3.5 edition in favor of combat-only mechanics, stripped away a lot of theater of the mind to make it easier for tabletop scenery / at the time they were developing their own virtual tabletop that kind of failed, and so the 4th edition D&D kind of suffered because it was designed to facilitate direct integration to a VTT, and that fell apart, and it just was not that wildly popular system. Combined with that, they had also left the wildly popular and successful OGL, the 1.0A OGL, and went with this new, very restrictive gaming license that was effectively so restrictive you couldn't really do anything for 4th edition practically without jumping through massive number of hoops or really having to get a better license agreement with Wizards of the Coast to be able to publish material. Because 4th edition was so drastic, a lot of people that fell in love, myself included, most of my friends, hated 4th edition because we were avid 3.5 fans. So Paizo, the writer / publisher of Pathfinder, decided, hey, this is a great entry point for us to get into the market. We've already had some minor success publishing our own material, but let's take the OGL, take all that 3.5 content, clean it up, essentially published what I like to call 3.75 edition Pathfinder 1st edition. And so the fans rejoiced, and there was much celebrating, and peace reigned throughout the land, as all of the 3.5 players that felt screwed over by 4th edition, abandoned by Wizards, ended up having a home in Pathfinder 1st edition. Well, Wizards of the Coast woke up and realized that 4th edition really wasn't all there, so they redid a lot of things, stripped out a lot of issues, streamlined the rules, and came out with their currently most popular edition of Dungeons & Dragons ever, 5th edition. Paizo, after many years, realized, hey, 3.5 / 3.75 edition is great, but there's a lot of bloat in the rules. It became very bloaty with all the supplements. it gets very finicky. Balance is practically totally impossible once you start adding in all of the material. They were like, we need to come in and streamline this. 5th edition, wildly successful. It's popular. Let's take some of the good ideas that I personally believe Wizards of the Coast failed to execute on. Take those good ideas, combine that with a lot of what made 3.5 edition great, and sort of came up with this version, Pathfinder 2nd edition. As a longtime 3.5/Pathfinder 1st edition fan, I like this 2nd edition Pathfinder rule set. It got rid of a lot of the bloat. It got rid of a lot of the issues that were starting to really become problematic that weighed down the gameplay of Pathfinder 1st edition. And though its math is a little bit finicky with some areas that didn't get resolved during the playtest, the Pathfinder 2nd edition core rulebook is a very good entry point into RPGs. It solves the love of 3.5 edition players like myself, keeps most of that back-end math the same, but cleans it up through its presentation in here, and adds a lot of great features that make this system a really good RPG contender in that OGL/D&D compatible role-playing game space. So now if we open this up, Pathfinder 2nd edition also deviates from Dungeons and Dragons in the fact that everything you need to play the game is actually here in this, almost everything you need is in this one book. The one thing you do need is a bestiary. Either you can adapt ones that are already out there that you own, or you can buy their own official book. Pathfinder, while very compatible with other adventures, you really want the Pathfinder bestiary to import your own monsters because of some of the balance with some other systems. I'll get into that a little bit later. But starting off with this art page here, very good artwork throughout. I like the evolution of the Pathfinder artwork, that classic style. We're adventuring in the deep caverns and lots of creepy things that we got to look out for in our adventure. The first chapter is just your basics. What is an RPG? How do those core mechanics of RPGs work? Again, if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons or an OSR RPG, it's stuff that you're not unfamiliar with. What does change, however, drastically in Pathfinder 2nd edition is their action economy system. So, an issue with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons and 3.5, how a turn was structured, what actions could be done in a turn. Some things could take longer than a couple minutes. Some things were registered in minutes. Some things were registered in rounds. It got really complicated, your action economy in Pathfinder 1st edition. Pathfinder 2nd edition said, drop all that. It's a simple, you have 3 actions per round. So you have either free action, which means it doesn't cost anything to use it, like your shout, hey you, that's a free action. Your reaction, which is essentially you're not proactively doing it, it's just your trigger by some other NPC or other player's action, and then you automatically react to it. Or it takes 1 action point, 2 action point, or 3 action point to get your action done. And again, in a 3 action system, so movement is a single action. What's nice is rather than messing with, okay, your dash or your run, you multiply by 2 or 3, but that negatively impacts combat. Pathfinder 2nd edition says get rid of all that. Run is or movement up to your normal base movement calculation is a single action for that round. So you want to move fast. What does that do? Well, you want to move 30 feet, assuming you're a human. Single action. You want to dash in there to slash at the enemy. Okay, 2 run actions, 1 attack action. You want to run away, because the enemy is getting too deadly. You use all 3 of your run movement actions as your for movement. So you move your total of 90 feet away from the enemy. You're running away effectively. You use up all of your actions and movement. That makes this much simpler rather than having to fight with charts or incompatibility or fight with what could reasonably be expected, the amount of actions you take in a turn. No, it's just single action, double action, or 3 action cost, essentially. 1/3 use up 2 or takes a full round action. Much simpler. Their action economy in this system. Another thing they do in here, they do keep, you'll notice the classes, and in this game they call it Ancestries instead of race, are a little bit more simplified than what you're used to. This doesn't have prestige classes like you're used to in 3.5 style art, Dungeons and Dragons, or I think 5th edition doesn't do prestige classes anymore. This keeps got rid of a lot of that because of how your progression system is handled later in the book. But starting off with, when you do your player creation, in this, instead of race, you again select your ancestry. Now, in general, I like to keep class and race, or class or race as class style play. When you do games like Old School Essentials, which is a modernization of Moldvay Cook's Dungeons and Dragons basic expert rules, your race is a class. So if you are a dwarf, that's not just your base ancestry stats, that is also your class. If you're an elf, that is also your class. I kind of like that balance in older style editions to keep dwarves and elves more special in play, especially when you compare it to 3.5 edition rule versions of this rule set, keeping race and class separate. What Pathfinder does, however, to make the two interesting again and worthwhile, actually separating race from class, is how they handle these ancestry bits about your character. So there's some bits that are universal no matter what type of dwarf you take. For example, starting 10 hit points, space speed 20. You get your basic ability boosts, which one has a negative, what your starting languages are, your basic traits. You get dark vision, and you can get, depending upon if you do an ancient-blooded dwarf, a death warden dwarf, or a forged dwarf, some minor things. But the majority of how a character's ancestry evolves is through the ancestry feats. So every couple levels, you get to expand the feats that you get to choose from to expand upon your dwarf. So instead of older styles where you would have instantly dwarven knowledge of your racial history, or you would have immediate access to your racial weapons, now those are feats. So you have special ancestral abilities that you gain throughout leveling up. Instead of them all being concentrated at the beginning, it allows for a little bit more powerful ancestry feats to be included throughout the evolution of your player character, and a lot more variety of how player character evolves throughout gameplay. So you could argue that, oh, my dwarf was raised amongst humans, so it doesn't make sense to actually have inherent knowledge about dwarven lore. Well, now that's a feat, so you can separate that out. Maybe do stone cunning. And so because of you being a dwarf, you were in the mines, of course, helping the humans mine. Well, now you get a slight benefits to perception checks while stone crafting. That makes more sense in a narrative sense, and also directly translates into a gameplay mechanic sense. So these ancestry feats allow for a lot more variation amongst the core races in the game. It allows for more unique deviation as the player character progresses. It allows for, in my view, an easier time integrating new feats without having to add in all this junk about 50,000 different varieties of dwarves. No, you just keep your 3 core dwarves, and the rest are just ancestry feats that you add later that the player can choose from. It allows for a lot more modularity of evolving the player class. And when you include that with other how it handles, for instance, humans, where instead of messing with half elf, half orc, humans instead can choose from the elven ancestry feats. So it allows you to theoretically later have more choice with half, not just half human, half whatever. You could do half elven, half dwarf, half orc, half elven. So it allows for a lot more expandability of the evolution of your player classes with this modular ancestry system moving forward. Easier to integrate new ones, theoretically easier to explain and allow for dwarf-elf relations. I know somebody's probably yelling at me somewhere that there's some rule book that explicitly says dwarves and elves can't mate. I don't care. Most players don't care. They're going to be like, hey, we want to do our half-elven dwarf mix, and so be it. So that allows for a unique variability. It also allows for you to have a party, for instance, of, technically speaking, all dwarves, but because each player might choose different ancestral feats as they level up. Even though you're all dwarves, you're not all shoehorned into one play style. You actually have the ability to branch out, to expand, to open your mind, and learn about and increase the options available to your players. Now, goblins is considered a base ancestry in this game. Pathfinder, or Paizo, and goblins have been joined at the hip since the beginning, so this one ended up getting a little bit of fan backlash. I'm like, I don't care. Increase the number of core ancestries available at the beginning. What do I care? Now, it's a little bit odd, the fact that, technically speaking, historically, goblins have always been evil. Now you provide them the opportunity to actually be heroes. If you look at the comic series, it's a little bit more understandable, though I think that was the Pathfinder comic book series was a little bit of mind control and a question of nature versus nurture blowing up in the scientist face. Memory serves me right, but it can be interesting. Anyway, these are your ancestries. Now, classes play a little bit differently than you're used to in 3.5 edition and 5th because of how the action economy works. For example, the Monk's Fury of Blows behaves slightly differently, but it does, for the most part, handle in a way that you're used to from a 3.5 perspective. You level up your classes. However, again, the more modularity of this class design, instead of you only get X number of skills, one at each couple levels, they've decided to go with, hey, here's a couple different class feats that you can get per level. So again, everybody can be a ranger, but because of the different evolutionary pathways of the ranger, it can take you in different directions. So, for instance, when you had older editions where you might have to focus in at the beginning your range or your two-handed weapon combat focus, here it allows you to evolve your class a little bit better. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that, depending upon what you need to synergize your character with the other party members, but not so shoehorny that you can only adopt a one play style going forward. So it allows for much more varied evolution of a character, perhaps as the adventure changes. But it does include most of the core classes that you are familiar with. Your fighter, your sorcerer, your wizard, your thief, your cleric, though I think they call them the cleric is the same. The paladin, I think, was changed to champion now. Again, the special abilities are now modular feats that you get leveled up. So again, it allows for much more modularity. You don't have to come up with 50,000 different variations of a fighter anymore. You can just say, this is a fighter. this is the expanded number of fighter feats that we're introducing. No need to come up with the 5,000th variation of the fighter that has 50% overlap with the base fighter. So again, allowing for much more customization. Though it does have some sample classes for the player to give them a little bit of theming help, but you don't have to get locked into those again because of the feat modularity as the PC advances. Yep, this is the Paladin that they got renamed to Champion in this. I'm not sure why. They did change a couple names in this system, but it's very identifiable what is what still. It's not like you're going to be out in the cold trying to guess what is what. Again, your druids, should just look here on the side. It allows me to skip to the next chapter. So these are, whoops, I should actually stay here for a moment. One of the things, though, that they did change, they got rid of prestige classes. Again, keeping in mind with that modularity of the evolution of a player character, they went with a different path instead for multi-classing. So instead of traditional systems where you multi-class, where you take an XP penalty or have to take the XP of both the base class and then the multi-class and then all this other games, they said, nope, we're going to give you the option every couple of player levels, a feat, and you can spend that towards either an advanced focused feat or a multi-class feat. So what is a multi-class? Well, it's essentially a stripped-down version of the core class is in this game. So instead of you multi-classing where you start off life as a fighter and want to get some wizard ranks in there, well, narratively speaking, it's kind of hard to explain where wizard is such a hard profession to get into that it takes years of training to be able to master it, how you would be able to spend most of your beginning life as a fighter and then suddenly magically, pardon the pun, get some wizard levels in there. This instead assumes that if you want a multi-class, you're going to get a stripped-down version of that multi-class. So if you want to, for instance, start off as a fighter, well, you just can't become a full alchemist too, or a full druid, or a full whatever. You instead can get stripped down versions. So cleric, you might be able to cast some cleric spells, but you're only going to be able to do, for instance, maybe cast 1 or 2 at maximum. Instead of you're at level 20 fighter, you pick up a paladin level. You can't cast 4 level 1 cleric spells. No, you can only cast like 1 or 2 at a time. Or your druid, you can't wild shape the same way. Or your monk, where you don't get, I don't believe you get the Fury of Blows option, for instance. Or again, the rogue, some stripped down versions of it that or the wizard again, the sorcerer or wizard, where you're able to cast some basic spells, but you're not able to get all of the benefits like being able to focus on a trinket or have a familiar the same way. So I like that new system of evolution. Classes, this is where I prefer definitely Castles and Crusades, or you go to, again, old school essentials. Just get rid of the named classes. Either Castles and Crusades it, where you're just rolling compared to the base attributes, whether that's your primary attribute or secondary attribute, or old school essentials where it's just theater of the mind. I've gone less into skills, though again here, because you have skills and then because of how feats can interact with skills, you get sort of a featified skill system. It's a little bit hard to explain, but there are some reasons why you'd want to get into it. I just have gone less in favor of the skill system over my life and would prefer to go, again, either that Castles and Crusades, just roll against your primary or secondary attributes, and then, or just theater of the mind it. Your item equipment lot is pretty much the same that you're familiar with. Now, the Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you do have to be a little bit careful with your conversion. The reason being is Pathfinder 2nd Edition, one of the comments they made was make gold special again. When you look at older D&D, when you look at 5th edition, gold became so standardized that everything was transacted in gold. Really, copper and silver was just there for the theme that it could exist but was so hardly ever used. They've adjusted the economy in Pathfinder 2nd edition so that it relies a lot more on silver than other editions. So if you're going to be doing interchanging equipment between this and another module or RPG system, or importing another adventure and its items into this system, be careful. It is not a one-to-one economy transaction difference. You're going to have to re-level the economic value of that equipment because of the changes to the in-universe economy for Pathfinder to actually make silver the base standard and gold now special. So you're hardly ever going to find Electrum now or platinum pieces now. It's going to be primarily silver, and then gold is the new platinum. So they did revamp their economy, so be wary about that. They did get rid of, though, the weight system. They keep it now as bulk. So you have a certain number of equipment slots based upon your strength score, and these items now take up X amount of bulk. So, for instance, you have light, where it's like 10 of these items are this, I believe it's like 10 of them are the equivalent to one bulk, or you have some things like darts, where just practically speaking, you can have infinite number of darts. That's where some of the rules kind of fail, because, again, if you have somebody walking around with 10 million darts, realistically, that's going to be heavier than the freaking Elven Curve Blade, but it says no bulk, so... Or, no, those are bulk light. There was like some zero bulk items in here, I think. I might be... I take that back. I might be... Oh, yeah, here we are, the shurikens. Yep, the zero bulk. You could have 1 billion shurikens, and that realistically is heavier than a single javelin, but because of how the system works, it says that's free weight. I see why they went bulk, because most people didn't like having to calculate down to the kilogram how heavy everything was. I prefer, again, old school essentials, equipment handling, where it's just list all of the weight in equivalent coin costs. Now, again, this levels up by expending GP as experience. This still uses the classical 3.5, 4th edition, 5th edition. You gain XP, then you level up. That's one change that I would revamp on this is, again, because of the changes to the economy, you would have like silver to level up requirement in here. But I do prefer the economy system in old OSE, where it's listed in the equivalent coin weight, compared to this system personally. Again, that's personal preference. You can go some systems like Knave, where it's a sort of like a Resident Evil Tetris-shaped equipment pieces that you then got to slot together in the bag right for your inventory management. Again, all the equipment that you need to play. Again, all the spells are pretty much what you're familiar with. The ranges are closer to 3.5 edition than 5th, but they're not. I take that back. I'm thinking of a different system. This is closer to 5th edition ranges in the magic. However, again, as you can see, because of how animal form, for instance, is now broken up to what animal you choose, what melee or attack abilities it has, and then how many actions are required to do that. But now, again, your cast time, instead of messing with minutes, rounds, seconds, or all that jazz, now it's like, nope, just 2 casting actions, so you can move once and cast, or cast and then do a normal attack, and that's it. A system in here which, again, simplifies the action economy. You're not messing with minutes, seconds, turns, rounds, any of that. Just, nope, 3 actions. That was primarily the single biggest benefit that this system provides. The Age of Lost Omens is a in-universe guide, your quick, down and dirty orientation to how the various cultures, the various nation states interact with each other. This, if you're playing in your own adventure setting, this chapter is just going to get ripped right out. This is only applicable if you are playing in the Pathfinder Lost Omens Glorian world setting. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a really good setting and worth playing, and they have a lot of adventure paths that you can engage in, a lot of written material, a lot of books. They have audio dramas, comic books, novels, adventure path books that you can do that have really expanded the capabilities of this world to the point it's a really good one to play in. I know this one much better than I remember the Forgotten Realms. I am not necessarily a fan of something, part of the direction they're taking it in. They've interjected some modern politics that I don't particularly like in a fantasy game, particularly in a fantasy game with the overhaul of how the economy works because of introduction of magic, because of just ye olden times, how morals were different back then. It's like a lot of these changes don't make sense in a historical epic the way they think it does. And I think it's become much more sanitized and less unique a story setting. So older Glory, and I loved how they created this whole fleshed out world, but I wish they would keep it all fleshed out. I wish they wouldn't be trying to sanitize it for modern sensibilities / public opinion, because you're losing a lot of the unique individuality of those systems. Again, it does include your in-universe settings guide, the various factions that you can belong to, the various religions are in here and what they entail. Some basics on how to play the game. This is where your combat explanation, your spell explanation, how actions occur. The game mastering section, this is again your game master. It does have some nice rules in here. Well, what if you take critical attacks that maybe slice off an arm or an ear? You lose the ability to see out of one eye. Some basics about role-playing in the system. Now, again, if you're coming from 5th edition, this is closer to 3.5 edition math. As you can see here, when you get up to like level 25, you're getting some DC checks that can be in the 50+ range. Old Pathfinder 1st edition and 3.5 edition, you could get into some 60+ DCs. This, for me, is a comfort. I know this is fully my individual bias because of coming from 3.5, but for me, this system is much more comfortable for me to deal with because it's so similar to 3.5 edition, where I spent a good chunk of my life playing, not adjusting the DC scores to the very narrow range that 5th edition allows. Like, you really cap out at DC 20 in that system, and maybe some odd things get you into a 25, maybe a 30, but as you can see here, you get up to higher levels, you're getting into the 50. This is more intuitive for me. I know, and I personally believe that a natural affinity for this system is solely because of my familiarity with 3.5. I think old school Dungeons and Dragons / Moldvay Cook, when you look at its range, is more intuitive to teach new players because it's a much tighter range that you're going to be messing with than 3.5, than 5th edition. This just, for me, again, is much easier to make those intuitive choices for difficulty scaling. I can, as a game master, immediately, without looking through and finding equivalent references, figure out what I'm going to be making the difficulty with because I'm better tuned to it. But I know that's more personal bias than necessarily the overall ability of this system. In here you have your crafting treasures, where you can provide special abilities on top of unique magical items and treasures that you can obtain. Again, because the modularity of how its feat system works, they kind of apply that to items as well. So when you create your artifacts, you're sort of creating these feated artifacts in a way. But most of them are familiar if you've played Pathfinder 1st Edition 3.5, and some of them are, again, the OGL compliant ones from Dungeons & Dragons proper are all in here as well, with your advanced staffs and swords and stuff. I need to check quickly, I should have before starting this, if they keep the old wands, for instance, as a 200 charges and that's it, with no rechargeability, or they went the 5th edition where you can actually there's 12 uses a day, but you can recharge the wand the next day type thing. See if they did a change to that. Okay, they went in a slightly different direction. So 3.5 edition, you use wands. It was 200 charges, and then that's it. The one's then useless after that point. This is, you're allowed frequency, certain number a day, once per day, use of the magic wand for the spell that's attached to it, and then you can cast the spell at the appropriate level. They have an overcharge mechanic where you can theoretically cast it more, but you have the risk of then permanently destroying the wand system in here. But compared to 5th edition, where you realistically only have the items that they provide for you, this has a much better item crafting generation table system that the game master can create, or even the players in their role-playing can create better magical items and craft them themselves, that they don't just have to rely on it being out there in the universe. Though this system is a much more higher magic level system than Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, that does have a few issues, not really with the rules, but because of some issues that you sort of have to slide over in how the universe works, where you have such easy access to magic, and it's yet you're still a feudal semi-feudal society. There's a couple things, but that's more of a game master and individual players than a problem with the rules and your ability to play it at the table. Overall, I would rate Pathfinder 2nd Edition a solid 17 on my D20 scale. My ultimate favorite RPGs to play nowadays is, again, either Castles and Crusades or Old School Essentials. I prefer the OSR style of gameplay, that you go back to the original version. This, because of some changes that they've made to the system, it would require a lot of overhaul on the game master's part to really play this in a OSE style, where you have, again, silver for XP, some of the deadliness of monsters. This is for those who really like that heroic player against the environment, not the classic you could die, or think this is... I'm forgetting my video games because I never play them. Think this is Dark Skulls. This is Dragon's Dogma. Think that comparison. This is a much grittier, darker system where that's very punishing but fair. This is for those that like that more heroic style of combat, where you get to invoke in your power fantasy. This one, you can be slightly ahead of the curve. This one, you're practically always behind the power curve. Doing that direct comparison, though, if you're looking to escape from 5th edition, or you realize that 3.5 edition is just kind of too clunky and you don't have enough time as a game master to fully invest in it, this is a really good RPG. I highly recommend it. It's really popular right now because it's a great alternative to Dungeons and Dragons. It's, again, even though it uses a wildly modified system, it is a reverse. You can make this compatible with any OSR or OGL compliant product that's based on Dungeons and Dragons. You do have to make some adjustments. Again, this is Power Fantasy, this is Dark Souls. So if you're trying to import a old school's essential adventure into here, you're going to have to really change the difficulties because these systems are aimed at entirely different groups. But again, that's personal preference. The Dark Souls and your Elden Ring versus your Dragon's Dogma Hero Fantasy. But if you're looking for that switch over, this is a good one. This is, again, the entry point right now is very easy. There's always sales going on for Pathfinder Core Rulebook. They also have a nice digest version of this as well that brings it down to this size, though the print is super small, so you better not be so old that you need like telescopes for reading glasses, because you'll never be able to use their digest version. So as a warning, it's definitely younger friendly, those digest versions, but they have good PDF support, good community support. This is technically an OGL product right now. Per Paizo, they say it's because old version, because of the compatibility of OGL 1.0a and people's familiarity with the license is, in their words, solely the reason why this is an OGL product was so that others can import their OGL adventures into here. I'm not a lawyer, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn last night. I'm not sure that this is so not deviant. This deviates so significantly from D&D proper that you could get away with this without including the OGL in here. Because, again, there's a lot of familiarity for those who are Dungeons & Dragons players. They can easily swap over to this without much work. It just makes life a lot easier for 3.5 players. And if you're a 5th edition player that just feels like you're getting shoehorned into, you must play it the way Wizard says you play it or else, this provides you a lot of opportunities to really expand and play the game Burger King style, or you can have it your way. If you like this review, think maybe I'm wrong on my opinions of this, I know this I'd rated an 18, this I'm sort of a 17 on it. You can voice your objections in the comments. If you have your own particular takes on Pathfinder 2nd Edition, please include them in the comments below. If you'd like to get a discussion, or hey, maybe even get a group together of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, highly recommend it. Get those started in the comments. Help provide that community support so people can not only make the switch, but immediately find a community to switch into and keep them going, and help them on the path towards non-Wizards gaming material moving forward. Other than that, there'll soon be a review coming out on the Abomination Vaults, so please keep an eye in the corner for that. Other than that, see you next time. Hope you like playing your RPGs, and remember, my friends, goblins are awesome. Keep them in every RPG going forward, Paizo. See you next time!